Well, we understand that there has been a plane crash on the southern tip of Manhattan. You're looking at the World Trade Center.
And you can see the two towers, a huge explosion now, raining debris.
On September 11, 2001, the United States was blindsided by a series of orchestrated attacks carried out by Islamic fundamentalists. The reaction by the American public and international community was unprecedented. President Bush's approval rating reached 88%. Even historic enemies of the United States, such as Iran, condemned the attack. Immediately following these attacks, President Bush declared war on terror, leading the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, better known as NATO, to invoke Article 5 of its charter for the first time in its history. This gave the American military international support for their war on terror. This vague initiative was designed to target and destroy Islamic terrorism throughout the world. Directly following this declaration, the United States and its allies invaded Afghanistan, the nation identified as harboring those responsible for the September 11th terror attacks.
18 months after the attacks, in March of 2003, the United States declared war on Iraq. Iraq was ruled by dictator Saddam Hussein, an Arab nationalist. Along with the Coalition of the Willing, a group of nations who supported the American invasion, the United States successfully toppled Saddam's fascist rule in a little over a month. His fall was followed by a rise of insurgent behavior and the eventual creation of the Islamic State in the Levant. To justify this invasion, the American government cited support of radical Islamic terrorism and weapons of mass destruction. However, Saddam was a secular leader. This led us to the question, why did the United States invade Iraq?
Through our initial research of the events leading up to the Iraq War, we were able to identify three potential reasons for the invasion: fear of terrorism in response to 9/11, the weapons of mass destruction theory, and American financial interests.
We started by speaking with former Bush administration official Howard Krongard. Krongard served as the Inspector General of the State Department from 2005 to 2008. The Inspector General is responsible for ensuring integrity within the Department of State. They report directly to Congress and the Secretary of State on the internal affairs of the department. Mr. Krongard's high-level position within the Bush administration gives him a unique perspective on what influenced the United States' invasion of Iraq. Okay, so why do you think the United States invaded Iraq in the first place?
Well, the principal reason was because of the fear that Saddam Hussein had or was in the process of developing and acquiring weapons of mass destruction. I would say a secondary reason was it was the last best hope for instituting a democratic government in the Middle East, because Iraq had a tradition of a bureaucratic base, and they had some things that would have led to a possible democratic state if the people were more secure, if there was peace. But as I say, the first reason was certainly the fear that there was going to be weapons of mass destruction and they would eventually be shared with Al-Qaeda.
Is that the first reason or the main reason, or both?
Well, I would say it's both. It's the first reason and the main reason. I mean, 9/11 is what prompted the
most direct reason.
Pardon?
The most direct reason?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. And so you don't think it has anything to do with the oil?
No. People have suggested that. I don't think that at all. I don't think the war would.
Do you have a reason, or you just?
No, I just don't think it wouldn't have. It just wouldn't have made sense. People wouldn't have risked all of those lives for oil, and the Iraqi infrastructure was already being questioned. And as we found out later, it was very poor, and so the insurgents were able to disrupt significantly the oil transmission.
And not much to do with the military and industrial complex?
Well, some people's views may have been impacted or influenced by that, but I don't think that was what any decision maker made a decision based upon.
As stated by Mr. Krongard, the Bush administration cited the weapons of mass destruction theory as the main reason for the invasion of Iraq in 2003. Weapons of mass destruction, or WMDs, are defined as nuclear, radiological, chemical, biological, or any other weapon that can kill and bring significant harm to a large number of humans or cause great damage to human-made structures, natural structures, or the biosphere. Iraq had a long history involving WMDs. Starting in the early 1970s, Saddam Hussein sought to arm himself with WMDs. He successfully acquired chemical weapons in the 1980s with the assistance of Western powers such as the United States, the United Kingdom, and Germany. Using these chemical weapons, Saddam killed tens of thousands of Kurds, Iraqis, and Iranians with little backlash from the Western world. However, in 1990, Saddam would make a choice he would forever regret.
On August 2, 1990, Iraqi forces invaded Kuwait, which caused international outrage. The world quickly responded by placing sanctions on Iraq and beginning Operation Desert Shield, a strategic troop buildup on the Iraqi border. In early 1991, the newly formed coalition invaded Iraq in Operation Desert Storm. This forced the Iraqi military back inside their own borders. The Iraqis surrendered and signed a ceasefire agreement. In the ceasefire, Iraq was forbidden from acquiring or creating new WMDs and were ordered to destroy any they currently possessed.
Following the Iraqi defeat, a new special UN commission was formed titled the United Nations Special Commission on Iraq, UNSCOM. The primary focus of this commission was to ensure the Iraqis followed the surrender agreement. From 1991 to 1995, the commission discovered a large biological warfare program within Iraq. In 1995, Israel revealed documents that showed the Iraqis were growing anthrax and other dangerous substances which could be used in chemical weapons. In response to these discoveries, the UNSCOM made the decision to destroy the facilities where they believed development was occurring in 1996. 3 years later, in 1998, during the Clinton administration, the American and British Air Forces bombed more facilities in Iraq. This was known as Operation Desert Fox. The United States justified the bombing, citing a lack of transparency from the Iraqis and the expulsion of UN inspectors from the nation. However, the United States did not see this as an immediate threat. According to Mr. Krongard, although American officials were aware of potential WMDs, the threat was limited enough that a full-scale invasion could not be justified.
There was a crucial issue with UNCOM's investigative force and the intelligence they collected. They were accused of being an American espionage unit by Saddam, and the evidence is convincing. In 1999, it was revealed that the CIA and MI6, the British intelligence service, had planted agents within UNCOMs. Under the disguise of United Nations investigators, the CIA deployed eavesdropping equipment to listen to high-level Iraqi leaders, including Saddam, in an operation codenamed Shake the Tree. This was done without United Nations consent or knowledge, and the intelligence was not shared with UNCOMs. In addition to the accusations of espionage, evidence shows that the American claims that Saddam kicked out investigators is false. This unsubstantiated rumor was perpetuated by Western media. The truth is America called to pull out these investigators. Once Bill Clinton passed the Iraq Liberation Act of 1998 with bipartisan support, Iraqi regime change was officially American policy 3 years before September 11th and 5 years before the invasion of Iraq in 2003. America was already preparing for a potential war with Iraq. However, as President Clinton's term came to a close, so did the era of UNCOM supervision of Iraq and American espionage in Iraq.
A big call to make. CNN announces that we call Florida in the Al Gore column. This is a state both campaigns desperately wanted to win.
Stand by. CNN right now is moving our earlier declaration of Florida back to the too close to call column. 25 very big electoral votes. in the home state of the governor's brother, Jeb Bush, are hanging in the balance. This no longer is a victory for Vice President Gore. George Bush, governor of Texas, will become the 43rd president of the United States.
The next year, 2000, George W. Bush was elected to the presidency of the United States alongside Vice President Richard Dick Cheney. Cheney had formerly served as Secretary of Defense during the first Bush administration and oversaw the first Gulf War. Directly following the end of Operation Desert Storm in February 1991, the Pentagon, overseen by Cheney, awarded an $8.5 million contract to an oil corporation called Halliburton. This contract was for a study on the use of private militaries in Kuwait. Halliburton also assisted in the creation of 725 oil wells in the Gulf nation. Once Cheney left his post in the Department of Defense, he became the CEO and president of Halliburton. From 1995 to 2000, Cheney would embroil the company in multiple scandals, including accused violations of the Trading with the Enemy Act. In July of 2000, Cheney left his post at Halliburton after he was selected to run alongside George Bush. His severance included a large stock option package which would vest during his time as vice president.
After President Bush's election, Vice President Cheney recommended Donald Rumsfeld to take the position of Secretary of Defense. Although Rumsfeld was not Bush's first choice, he was unable to secure a desired secretary and followed Cheney's recommendation. 8 months into the Bush administration, tragedy struck. The attacks in the morning on September 11, 2001 shook America to its core. That afternoon, Rumsfeld quickly ordered his aides to investigate potential Iraqi involvement in the attack. Rumsfeld was a believer in the WMD theory and wanted a war with Iraq. In November of 2001, Rumsfeld would release a memo regarding Iraq. In a section of this memo titled How Start, Rumsfeld created 3 potential hypothetical scenarios the United States could use to justify an invasion of Iraq. Rumsfeld clearly wanted a war against Iraq and knew how to get one.
There were people who believed that if and when Saddam had weapons of mass destruction, they would be shared with terrorists. And President Bush used the term imminent. And when he used that term, he didn't mean it in the sense that it was tomorrow or the next day. It was in the sense that there were 2 lines going not parallel but converging, namely the Iraqi development of weapons of mass destruction and the activities of the terrorists in and around Iraq. So the imminence meant that this just had to happen because they were going together, and if and when he had those weapons, that's who would share them. So that made for a huge threat.
And these weapons could have been
chemical, biological, but certainly we knew that, or we thought we knew, that he was working to develop nuclear weapons. And I should add that while after those events, a lot of people have looked back and said, well, there really weren't any weapons of mass destruction, and they may be, correct. But at the time, every intelligence service in the world, including the Russians, the Israelis, the British, and of course our own, all believed that Saddam was working to develop nuclear weapons.
And so they didn't have them because of how poor the industry and the economics were?
It's possible. It's possible that he was, using it as a threat, that he was not really able or capable of doing it. I don't think there's a really clear answer to that.
Over the next year, the Bush administration would create and collect intelligence to justify an invasion. During these 12 months, Rumsfeld's head policy aide named Douglas Feith would provide reports studying a connection between Saddam and al-Qaeda to high-level officials. Later, the Office of the Inspector General of the Department of Defense would conclude that Feith's reports were heavily altered to support the invasion of Iraq.
A large amount of intelligence collected by the United States and other nations came from a man named Qadir Hamza. Hamza is an Iraqi defector who claimed to have been quote-unquote Saddam's bomb maker. In 2002, Hamza testified to Congress. During his testimony, he claimed Iraq had large amounts of weapons-grade uranium and would be able to possess nuclear weapons by 2005. His testimony created large amounts of media and political hype surrounding the WMD theory, giving it increasing credibility. However, Hamza's credibility was at best questionable. A former inspector for UNSCOM in Iraq named Scott Ritter stated that Hamza was a fraud. In 2002, he was quoted as saying, "We seized the entire records of the Iraqi nuclear program, especially the administrative records. We got a name of everybody, where they worked, what they did. If you go on the list of senior administrative personnel, you will not find Hamza's name. In fact, we didn't find his name at all." This was not the only evidence that Hamza was not telling the truth. In 2002, Saddam invited a new United Nations Commission and the International Atomic Energy Agency into Iraq, both of whom found no evidence to support the WMD theory.
Despite all the evidence, the United States and allies prepared to invade Iraq. During the preparation, in November 2002, Halliburton was consulted by the Department of Defense to prepare a plan for oil well firefighting and was awarded a no-bid $7 billion contract for Iraqi oil infrastructure. Halliburton was the only company allowed to bid on the contract. This contract and subsequent contracts with the military would provide Halliburton stock with a surge in value for the next 6 years.
From CBS News headquarters in New York, here is Dan Rather.
It was just over 90 minutes beyond President Bush's deadline for Saddam Hussein to leave Iraq that U.S. warships and planes, there were F-117 stealth bombers involved, launched the opening salvo of Operation Iraqi Freedom.
In March 2003, the United States and allies would invade Iraq and topple Saddam. American forces would find no evidence of mass destruction and no evidence of a connection between Saddam and al-Qaeda. So why did the U.S. really invade Iraq? While the majority of the Bush administration and supporters of the war believed Saddam had weapons of mass destruction and was working with terrorists, a small group of individuals led by Vice President Dick Cheney and Secretary of Defense Donald Rumsfeld manipulated intelligence and used unreliable sources to start a war for their personal gain. Dick Cheney held hundreds of thousands of shares in Halliburton that would not vest until 2007, 2008, and 2009. In October 2005, it was revealed by Senator Lautenberg that Cheney's stock options had increased in value by over 3,000% to over $8 million total. In 2004, Donald Rumsfeld sold stock of 5 defense contractors currently working with the Pentagon. Both Cheney and Rumsfeld directly profited from the invasion of and war in Iraq. The reason for the United States invasion of Iraq was because a small group of high-level officials and advisors provided inaccurate intelligence to support the weapons of mass destruction theory and fabricated a connection between Saddam and al-Qaeda. They did this for financial gain at the expense of the American taxpayers and countless lives. This group of individuals were never held accountable for their actions and likely never will be. The Iraq War is an example of why government should always be questioned.
Our will equal to yours.